I have always believed you can tell everything you need to know about a man by looking at two things: the calluses on his hands and the foundation he chooses to build upon. At 68 years old, my hands are still thick, scarred from decades of rebar, splintered 2x4s, and frozen Chicago steel. I didn't start my life in boardrooms. I started it in the mud, digging out basements in the bitter winters of the late 70s. That was before I founded Cornerstone Group, before the portfolio expanded into billions of dollars in commercial real estate, and long before my name became a quiet whisper among the city's financial elite. I kept my name quiet on purpose. In the business world, anonymity is a fortress. Corporate structures, holding companies, and trusts shielded my personal identity from the public eye. To the outside world, Cornerstone Group is run by a faceless board and my brilliant chief operating officer, Elias Thorne. To my daughter Chloe and her new husband Julian Croft, I am just Marcus, a retired, modestly successful general contractor who managed to squirrel away enough from flipping mid-sized properties to live a quiet life in a brick brownstone. I never corrected them. When my wife passed away 10 years ago, I realized that wealth is a distorting mirror. It changes how people look at you. I wanted Chloe to stay grounded. I paid for the best private schools and out-of-state universities, hoping to give her the advantages I never had. But somewhere along the line, the privilege I provided mutated into entitlement. She learned to value the label on a jacket more than the man wearing it, which is why at 9:00 p.m. on a Tuesday, I was sitting on a plastic chair in the basement locker room of my own flagship building, lacing up a pair of scuffed, oil-stained steel-toe work boots. These boots saved my toes from a dropped steel I-beam back in '88. They are heavy, uncompromising, and real. I wear them every night for my shift. 3 weeks ago, I used a dummy corporation to hire myself as a night shift maintenance worker for the upper levels of Cornerstone Tower. I needed to keep moving. The sterile life of a retired billionaire was driving me insane. But more importantly, I wanted a front-row seat to my son-in-law's world, entirely stripped of the filters of high society. Julian's startup, Apex Solutions, leased the entire 42nd floor. "You're in early tonight, Mark." I looked up. Hector Ruiz, the night shift maintenance supervisor, was leaning against the doorframe. Hector was 58, with a thick salt and pepper mustache and the kind of permanent exhaustion etched into his eyes that only comes from decades of honest, invisible labor. He didn't know I owned the concrete beneath his feet, or that the paycheck he received every 2 weeks carried my signature. To Hector, I was just Mark, a bored widower trying to supplement his Social Security. "Can't sleep, Hector," I said, offering a small, genuine smile. Figured I might as well get a head start on the upper floors. Hector walked in and tossed a foil-wrapped package onto my lap. "My wife's tamales, pork and green chili. You looked too skinny yesterday, Mark. Eat half now, half at midnight." I held the warm foil, genuinely touched. In the cutthroat world of private equity I usually inhabited, a free lunch always came with a hidden contract. Here, in the basement, it was just grace. "Thank you, Hector. I owe you one." "Just make sure you get the smears off the glass on 42, Hector chuckled, grabbing his own supply cart. "Those tech kids upstairs, they treat the place like a frat house. Boss man up there acts like he owns the sky." "I'll make it shine," I promised. At 9:45 p.m., I stepped off the service elevator onto the 42nd floor. The contrast was immediate and jarring. Apex Solutions was a monument to unearned arrogance. The walls were seamless, frosted glass. The floors were imported Italian marble, transitioning into plush, sound-dampening corporate carpets. There were cold brew taps, a ping-pong table that had clearly never been used for anything other than resting expensive briefcases, and ergonomic chairs that cost more than Hector made in a month. It was the architecture of a company projecting wealth it didn't possess. I pushed my cleaning cart down the main corridor, my steel-toe boots sinking into the thick carpet with a heavy rhythmic thud. I knew the truth about Apex Solutions. I read the confidential risk assessment files on Elias's desk last week. Apex was a logistics startup bleeding cash at an unsustainable rate. They were essentially bankrupt, surviving entirely on the hope of a massive Series B investment, an investment they were begging Cornerstone Capital to provide. Julian Croft was relying on a faceless chairman he had never met to bail out his failing company in exactly 21 days. If Cornerstone didn't sign that contract, Apex would implode. I emptied the recycling bins in the bullpen, working methodically, letting the rhythm of physical labor quiet my mind. I liked the work, wiping down the glass, taking out the trash. It was honest. You saw a mess, you cleaned it, and the world was marginally better for your effort. It was a simple equation that corporate America had completely forgotten. As I approached the corner executive suites, the muffled sound of loud, boasting voices drifted down the hall. I paused, leaning against the handle of my mop cart. Through the frosted glass of the executive lounge, I could see shadows moving. I recognized Julian's silhouette immediately. He was 34, impeccably groomed, and moved with the frantic, nervous energy of a man desperate to convince everyone he was the smartest person in the room. "It's a done deal, gentlemen," Julian's voice carried through the crack in the door, slick with the confidence of expensive scotch. "Cornerstone is in the bag. 3 weeks from now, we sign the Series B. The chairman is a ghost, but his money spends just the same. Once that capital clears, we double our salaries and expand to the West Coast." "Are we sure their due diligence won't catch the discrepancies?" Another, younger voice asked hesitantly. "Discrepancies?" Julian scoffed, a cruel, sharp sound. "It's creative accounting, Tyler, and no, they won't catch it. The suits at Cornerstone are dinosaurs. They only look at the projections I feed them. By the time they realize the cash flow is redirected, we'll be too big to fail." I tightened my grip on the handle of the cart until my knuckles turned white. Redirected cash flow. In the construction business, we call that stealing the copper out of the walls before the house is even sold. He wasn't just arrogant, he was a fraud. And Chloe was married to him. My chest tightened at the thought of my daughter. Did she know? Was she willfully blind to how Julian funded the designer handbags and the European vacations she flaunted on social media? I took a slow, deep breath, forcing my heart rate to settle. I am not a man who acts on impulse. A poorly poured foundation takes time to cure before it cracks under weight. I needed to see exactly how deep the rot went. I pushed the heavy rubber door of the executive lounge open with my shoulder, pushing my cart inside. The wheels let out a sharp, high-pitched squeak that cut through the jazz music playing softly in the background. The room smelled of ozone, and $80 a pour Macallan. 3 junior executives were lounging on leather sofas, their ties loosened. Julian stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago skyline, a crystal tumbler in his hand. He wore a custom-tailored navy suit, and his feet were clad in flawless, polished Oxford leather shoes. The conversation died instantly. Julian slowly turned away from the window, his eyes scanning down from my faded gray work shirt to my scuffed steel-toe boots. His upper lip curled in a sneer of pure, unfiltered disgust. "What the hell is this?" Julian snapped, his voice sharp like a cracking whip. "Who let you in here?" "Just emptying the trash, sir," I said evenly, keeping my voice low and respectful. I did not break eye contact. Julian took a step forward, the scotch swirling dangerously in his glass. He looked at me not as a human being, but as a stain on his perfect, expensive carpet. "You interrupt a private executive meeting to take out the garbage?" Julian demanded. He set his glass down on a mahogany side table with a sharp clack. "Are you deaf, old man, or just stupid?" I stood perfectly still, my hands resting lightly on the cart. The trap was set. Now I just had to watch him walk into it. "Are you deaf, old man, or just stupid?" Julian's words hung in the chilled, heavily air-conditioned air of the executive lounge. The jazz music from the corner speakers seemed to dip in volume, leaving only the sharp, nervous silence of the 3 junior executives watching us. I kept my hands resting lightly on the handle of my cleaning cart. I did not flinch, and I did not look away. In my 30 years running construction crews, I had stared down union bosses, mob-tied concrete suppliers, and screaming city inspectors. Julian Croft, in his perfectly tailored suit and flushed, alcohol-soaked face, was nothing more than a bad storm hitting a brick wall. "I apologize for the interruption, Mr. Croft," I said, my voice steady, adopting the deferential tone he expected from a man in a gray work shirt. I was told the lounge was empty for the night. You were told wrong, Julian snapped. He took a slow, deliberate step toward me. The ice in his crystal tumbler clinked against the glass. He looked down at my work shirt, his eyes narrowing with a contempt so pure it almost looked practiced. Do you know how much we pay in lease fees for this floor? We pay for exclusivity, not to have some geriatric peasant rattling his trash cart while I'm conducting business. Hey, Julian, take it easy, the junior executive named Tyler mumbled from the leather sofa. His face was pale, his words slurring slightly. He's just doing his job. Shut up, Tyler, Julian said without looking at him. Julian's eyes remained locked on my scuffed steel-toe boots. Then, a slow, cruel smile spread across his face. Actually, since you're here, Mark, that's what your faded little badge says, right? You can make yourself useful. Julian took another step forward. He leveled his glass of Macallan over the toe of his right shoe, and with a flick of his wrist, he tipped it. Ice cubes and amber liquid splashed directly onto the flawless, custom Italian leather, splattering slightly onto the carpet. Look at that, Julian said, his voice dripping with mock tragedy. You startled me. You made me spill my drink. He pointed a manicured finger at the floor. Clean it up and wipe down the shoe. Leather like this stains if you leave it. The room went dead silent. Even Tyler stopped breathing. A younger version of myself, the man who threw a rogue drywall contractor through a first-floor window in 1984, would have taken Julian by the throat and shown him the view from the 42nd floor window. But I was not that man anymore. I was a father trying to diagnose the structural integrity of his daughter's life. I needed to know how deep this cruelty went. Without a word, I reached into my cart, pulled out a clean microfiber towel, and slowly lowered myself to my knees. The plush corporate carpet pressed against my joints. That's it, Julian sneered above me, shifting his weight slightly so the toe of his shoe was closer to my face. Get the sides. You missed a spot near the welt. Frankly, it's the closest you'll ever get to wearing $1,000. I kept my head down, wiping the scotch from the leather. The smell of the alcohol was sharp, mixing with the expensive polish on the shoe. Suddenly, a loud groan broke the tension. Tyler, the pale executive, scrambled off the sofa. He staggered past the frosted glass partition, clutching his stomach. He didn't make it to the hallway. He collapsed against the edge of a mahogany side table, retching violently onto the floor and the baseboards. The acidic stench of bile and liquor immediately overpowered the room. Julian recoiled in disgust, backing away and covering his nose with his sleeve. Jesus Christ, Tyler, are you an animal? Get out of here! Tyler groaned, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand, and stumbled out of the lounge without a word. Julian glared at the mess, then looked down at me, still kneeling by his feet. Well, Julian demanded, you're the janitor. Get a bucket, and maybe use those hideous steel-toe monstrosities to scrape it up, peasant wear for peasant work. I slowly pushed myself up off the floor. I folded the damp microfiber towel and placed it back on my cart. I was just turning toward the supply closet when the heavy glass doors of the lounge swung open. Julian? The driver is downstairs. Are you? The voice stopped. I froze. Chloe stood in the doorway. She was wearing a beige designer trench coat I had bought for her 29th birthday, her hair perfectly blown out. She looked at Julian, then at the sickening puddle near the table, and finally, her eyes tracked down to the man in the gray work shirt standing next to the mop cart. Our eyes met. For 3 agonizing seconds, time stopped. I saw the flash of recognition in my daughter's eyes. I saw the shock. And then I waited. I waited for the fire I had tried to instill in her. I waited for her to ask Julian what the hell was going on. I waited for her to defend her father. Julian sighed heavily, adjusting his cuffs. Chloe, perfect timing. Just waiting for this incompetent janitor to clean up Tyler's mess. Honestly, the help they hire in this building is pathetic. Had to teach him how to wipe down a shoe. I watched Chloe's face. I watched the internal calculation happen in real time. I watched her weigh the truth against the luxury of her lifestyle, her country club memberships, and her status as a tech CEO's wife. She swallowed hard. The color drained from her cheeks, but her posture stiffened. She broke eye contact with me, turning her chin just slightly toward the window. It smells awful in here, Chloe said, her voice tight, perfectly manicured, and entirely devoid of warmth. Let's just go, Julian. Don't waste your breath on him. The driver is waiting. She didn't claim me. She walked over, took her husband's arm, and steered him toward the door. As they passed me, Julian didn't even look in my direction. Chloe kept her eyes fixed straight ahead, staring at the frosted glass as if I were completely invisible. The door clicked shut behind them. I stood alone in the lounge. The silence was deafening. I felt a cold, hollow space open up in my chest, a quiet collapse of a load-bearing wall I had spent 30 years reinforcing. She knew. She had seen me on my knees, wiping her husband's shoes, and she had chosen to look away. Madre de Dios. Hector burst through the door, his eyes wide as he took in the scene. He rushed over to me, grabbing my shoulder. "Mark, are you okay? I saw them leave. The boss looked furious. What happened?" He looked at the mess in the corner. "Ah, hell. Don't worry about that, my friend. I've got the sawdust and the heavy enzyme cleaner. You sit down." "I can help, Hector," I said quietly, my voice sounding hollow even to my own ears. "No, absolutely not," Hector insisted, gently pushing me toward a chair. "You look pale, Mark. Sit. Eat the rest of those tamales. I'm not letting a man your age scrub up after these spoiled brats. I got this." I sat in the chair, watching Hector work. He didn't ask questions. He just saw a man in a degraded position and immediately stepped in to absorb the damage. A stranger, making $14 an hour, possessed more character in his calloused hands than my own daughter did in her entire being. The next morning, the sunlight filtered weakly through the blinds of my brownstone. I sat at my small kitchen table, staring at a mug of black coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. My hands rested flat on the worn oak surface. I had not slept. The phantom weight of the scrub brush was still in my hand. The smell of the scotch and leather still lingered in my memory. My phone buzzed against the wood. It was a text message from Chloe. I stared at the screen for a long time before I picked it up. Part of me, the foolish, desperately hopeful father part of me, thought it might be an apology, a frantic explanation, a tearful admission that she had panicked, that she was leaving Julian, that she was coming home. I swiped the screen open. "Dad, I know what I saw last night. I don't know why you're doing this undercover worker thing, but I can't believe you'd actually put yourself in a position to embarrass me like that. Julian can never know who you are. His anniversary gala is next Friday. His biggest investors will be there. Given your situation and your insistence on acting like you're broke, I think it's best you don't come. Your working class aura just doesn't fit our brand right now. I hope you understand." I read the words 3 times. Your working class aura just doesn't fit our brand. The money I had used to buy her first car came from working class sweat. The tuition for her out-of-state university was paid for by the working class calluses on my hands. Everything she had, everything she was wearing when she walked past me last night, was built on the foundation of the very thing she was now banning from her life. I didn't cry. You don't cry when a building burns to the ground. You just stare at the ashes and calculate the cost of clearing the lot. My unconditional love had been weaponized. I had confused providing with parenting, and the result was a daughter who valued a monster's lifestyle over her father's dignity. I set the coffee mug in the sink. I picked up my phone and typed a single word in reply. Understood. I pressed send. I turned off the phone and set it face down on the counter. The emotional bridge between us was gone. I felt a strange, chilling sense of peace wash over me. The grieving was over. Now, there was only work to do. Julian Croft was a fraud. I had heard him brag about his creative accounting. I knew he was redirecting Apex's cash flow, likely to fund the very brand Chloe was so desperate to protect. He was counting on the Cornerstone Series B investment to save him from bankruptcy in exactly 20 days. But a man committing financial fraud doesn't leave his digital footprint exposed. He prints the secondary ledgers. He reviews them in the dead of night after the junior executives go home. And then he shreds them. Julian thought I was just an incompetent old man with a mop. He didn't realize that the janitor is the only person in the building who possesses the absolute authority to empty the executive trash. I walked into my hallway and looked down at my scuffed steel-toe work boots. I had 3 weeks before the cornerstone signing ceremony. It was time to gather the scraps. When you spend your life building things, you learn that demolition is a completely different discipline. Building requires optimism, patience, and a willingness to compromise with the elements. Demolition requires only cold, calculated precision. A poorly poured foundation doesn't just need to be patched, it needs to be pulverized. Otherwise, the rot simply spreads to whatever you try to build on top of it. I did not reply to Chloe again. Over the next week, I went to work every night, laced up my steel-toe boots in the basement locker room, and pushed my cleaning cart up to the 42nd floor. I did not speak to Julian when he was working late. I kept my head down, emptied the bins, and let the ghost of my daughter's betrayal harden into something unbreakable. My focus narrowed entirely to the corner executive suite. Financial fraud, like water damage, always leaves a stain if you know where to look. Julian was arrogant, but he wasn't a fool. He didn't leave his secondary ledgers on his desk, and he didn't save them on the company's shared cloud servers. He reviewed the real numbers late at night, printed them to verify his math, and then destroyed the evidence before he went home. Fortunately for me, Julian was a man who prioritized aesthetics over function. Instead of purchasing a commercial-grade micro-cut shredder that turns paper into unreadable confetti, he had purchased a sleek, expensive, strip-cut shredder that matched the minimalist decor of his office. On Wednesday night, during my 2:00 a.m. rounds, I found the executive suite empty. I locked the frosted glass door behind me. Working quickly in the dim light of the city skyline, I unlatched the top of Julian's shredder and emptied the basket into a heavy-duty contractor trash bag. I had a logistical problem. My own building security protocols, the ones I had personally approved a decade ago, required guards to search all maintenance workers' bags at the end of their shifts to prevent equipment theft. If a guard found a bag full of shredded executive documents in Mark the janitor's backpack, I would be fired by my own company, and Julian would be alerted. So, I used the one item of clothing Julian had mocked. Sitting in the basement locker room at the end of my shift, I took the compressed plastic bags of paper strips and packed them tightly into the deep, reinforced toes of my spare steel-toe work boots. I laced them up, threw them into my duffel bag, and walked right past the lobby security desk. The guards didn't blink. To them, it was just an old man carrying his heavy, dirty gear home. For the next 4 nights, I repeated the process. I would collect the strips, pack them into the boots, and carry them out. Hector noticed I was spending extra time in the executive suite, but true to his nature, he simply covered my other zones. "Take your time in there, Mark," Hector had said one night, handing me a thermos of hot coffee. "I got the bullpen. Just don't let that suit catch you resting. He's been in a foul mood all week." I thanked him, quietly adding another 0 to the bonus I planned to issue Hector when this was over. By day 8, my modest kitchen table had been transformed into a forensic engineering lab. I sat under the harsh glare of the overhead light, a pair of tweezers in my calloused hands, meticulously taping the strips of paper back together on large sheets of cardboard. My eyes burned and my back ached, but the rhythm of the work kept the grief at bay. Slowly, the architecture of Julian's fraud took shape. It was worse than I had imagined. The reconstructed pages were the true operating ledgers for Apex Solutions. Julian had set up a shell vendor called Aura Consulting LLC, a bitter, ironic echo of the Aura Chloe claimed to care so much about. Over the past 8 months, Julian had authorized over $1.4 million in fictitious consulting fees from Apex's operating capital directly into Aura's accounts. I cross-referenced the dates of the withdrawals with Chloe's social media. A $150,000 withdrawal in March perfectly aligned with their purchase of a new Porsche Cayenne. A $400,000 transfer in June matched the down payment on their summer house in the Hamptons. Julian wasn't just burning through startup capital, he was bleeding his own investors dry to fund the illusion of high society wealth. He was technically insolvent. The upcoming Cornerstone Series B investment of $5 million wasn't going to be used for expansion. It was exactly the amount he needed to quietly replace the stolen funds, pay his vendors, and cover his tracks before the board demanded an audit. He was using my money to pay for the lifestyle my daughter used as an excuse to cut me out of her life. On the morning of day 10, I did not put on my gray work shirt. I put on a tailored charcoal suit, took a private car to Cornerstone Tower, and rode the secure executive elevator directly to the 60th floor. Elias Thorne was waiting for me in his private office. Elias was 45, with a mind like a steel trap and a loyalty to me that bordered on militant. I had pulled him out of a crumbling private equity firm a decade ago and gave him the reins to my empire. He knew every brick in the Cornerstone portfolio. As I walked in and dropped the heavy cardboard sheets of taped-together ledgers onto his massive mahogany desk, Elias stood up. He took one look at the documents, then looked at my face. "Is this it?" Elias asked, his voice low and tight. "Every dime," I replied, walking over to the window that looked down on the city. "He's embezzling. He's in the hole for roughly $1.5 million. He plans to use our Series B capital injection to plug the leak and keep the lights on." Elias leaned over the desk, tracing the taped lines with his finger. His jaw tightened. He knew I had been working the night shifts, but he hadn't known the extent of what I'd endured. When I finally told him about the incident in the lounge, the spilled scotch, the shoes, and Chloe's subsequent text message, Elias had gone completely silent. Now, looking at the evidence, his professional restraint cracked. "I'm terminating the lease," Elias said coldly, picking up his desk phone. "Right now. I am sending building security to the 42nd floor. I am locking him out of the servers, and I am handing this file to the federal prosecutor's office by noon. He made you get on your knees, Marcus. I will ruin him today." "Put the phone down, Elias," I said softly. Elias paused, his hand hovering over the receiver. "Marcus, you have the proof. We don't need to wait." "If we lock him out today, it's a civil dispute," I explained, turning away from the window. "He'll claim the ledgers are draft projections. He'll hire a crisis PR firm, say Cornerstone is bullying a brilliant tech startup, and he'll tie us up in litigation for 2 years. He might even slither his way out of jail time. I don't want to wound him, Elias. I want to take the building down to the bedrock." I walked back to the desk and tapped the center of the taped ledger. "The Series B contract," I said. "Clause 14, Section C, the representation and warranties of financial disclosure." Elias's eyes widened slightly as he caught my drift. "The fraud clause." "Exactly," I said. "Right now he's just stealing from his own company. It's a crime, but it's messy. If he signs our Series B contract, he is legally certifying to Cornerstone Capital that his financial disclosures are accurate. The second his pen hits that paper, it becomes felony wire fraud and securities fraud against a multi-billion-dollar entity. He triggers the morality clause, voiding his lease instantly. He traps himself." Elias slowly lowered the phone. A grim, predatory respect settled over his features. "You want him to sign his own execution order." "I want him to believe he has won," I corrected. "Chloe sent me a message barring me from their anniversary gala next Friday. She wants to celebrate their artificial success without the embarrassment of my presence. Let them celebrate." "And the signing?" Elias asked, pulling a fresh legal pad toward him. "Schedule the formal signing ceremony for the morning after the gala," I instructed. "Saturday morning. Tell Julian the Supreme Chairman has finally agreed to meet him in person to finalize the deal." "He's going to walk into this boardroom expecting a coronation," Elias noted, writing down the dates. "Let him," I said, buttoning my suit jacket. "Make sure the legal team is in the room. Have the eviction notices drafted and notarized. And Elias?" Elias looked up. "Yes, Marcus?" "Make sure you invite Chloe. Tell Julian the chairman insists on meeting the spouses of his primary partners. I want her sitting right next to him when the walls come down." Friday evening, the night of the Apex Solutions anniversary gala, it rained. It was a cold, driving Chicago rain that slicked the streets and reflected the neon lights of the city in fractured, shimmering puddles. I sat in the quiet of my brownstone living room, listening to the heavy drops hit the glass. The only light in the room came from the glowing screen of my tablet resting on my lap. I was looking at Chloe's social media feed. She'd been posting updates every 15 minutes for the last 2 hours. The gala was being held in the grand ballroom of a luxury hotel downtown, a venue that commanded a small fortune just to open its doors. In the photographs, Chloe was wearing a floor-length emerald silk gown that likely cost more than my first 2 work trucks combined. She was smiling, holding a flute of vintage champagne, leaning against Julian, who was clad in a custom velvet tuxedo. Behind them was a massive ice sculpture of the Apex Solutions logo, slowly melting under the warm, flattering lights of the ballroom. I stared at the images, doing the math in my head. The venue, the open bar, the catered five-course meal, the string quartet, the designer clothes. It was easily a $150,000 evening, and every single cent of it was being paid for by Aura Consulting LLC. Julian was throwing a party to celebrate his own theft, using the stolen money to fund the celebration, and betting everything on my signature to cover his tracks in the morning. I zoomed in on a photo of my daughter. She looked beautiful, radiant, and entirely at ease in this world of fabricated prestige. There was no guilt in her eyes, no lingering shame over leaving her father on his hands and knees to scrub her husband's shoes a few weeks prior. She had built a fortress of entitlement around herself, and she was perfectly happy as long as the checks cleared. I pressed the power button on the tablet. The screen went black. The silence of the brownstone rushed back in. I had expected this moment to hurt more. I had expected a final agonizing wave of paternal grief. But as I sat there in the dark, I felt nothing but a cold architectural certainty. You cannot save a building once the foundation is turned to dust. You can only rope off the area, bring down the structure, and make sure nobody else gets hurt in the collapse. At 11:00 p.m., I put on my gray work shirt for the final time, picked up my duffel bag, and headed out into the rain. The basement locker room of Cornerstone Tower was quiet when I arrived. I sat on the wooden bench, pulled my scuffed steel toe boots from my bag, and began to lace them up. "You look like you're heading to a funeral, Mark." I looked up. Hector was standing in the doorway to the break room, holding 2 styrofoam cups of black coffee. He walked over and handed me one. His uniform was rumpled, and the deep lines around his eyes seemed more pronounced tonight. He looked exhausted, carrying a weight that had nothing to do with the physical labor of the job. "Just a long week, Hector," I said, taking the cup. The coffee was bitter and scalding, exactly how I liked it. "You look a little worn down yourself." Hector sighed, sitting heavily on the bench opposite me. He stared down at his own worn work boots. "Ah, it's just money, my friend. Always money." He rubbed the back of his neck. "My youngest, Elena. She's in her 3rd year of nursing school over at Loyola. Smart kid. Hardest worker I know. But they just bumped the tuition up again, and her grant didn't cover the difference. We're about $8,000 short for the semester." He took a slow sip of his coffee, shaking his head. "I'm looking at picking up weekend shifts over at the rail yard. It's brutal on the back, but I can't let her drop out. She's too close. She's going to be someone, Mark. Not like me, pushing a broom in the basement." I looked at Hector. Here was a man willing to break his own body to ensure his daughter had a legitimate chance at a better life. He wasn't stealing. He wasn't projecting a false aura. He was simply enduring. It was a mirror image of the sacrifices I had made for Chloe. But with a crucial difference, Hector's daughter was actually building something real. "She's lucky to have a father like you, Hector," I said quietly. "And for what it's worth, I don't think you're going to need those rail yard shifts. Things have a way of working out for good men." Hector offered a tired, appreciative smile. "From your lips to God's ears, Mark. Come on, let's go make the glass shine for the millionaires." At 1:30 a.m., I was running the industrial vacuum across the thick corporate carpet outside the executive suites on the 42nd floor. The floor was deserted. The only sound was the heavy hum of the machine. Then, the polished steel doors of the private executive elevator chimed and slid open. Julian Croft stepped out. He was still wearing his velvet tuxedo, the bow tie hanging loose around his neck. His hair was slightly disheveled, and he smelled strongly of expensive gin and rain. He walked with the heavy, exaggerated steps of a man who is incredibly drunk, but believes he is perfectly in control. He was carrying a leather portfolio under his arm, likely coming back to the office to retrieve the final drafts of the Series B contract for the morning. He stopped when he saw me. He swayed slightly on his feet, a slow, predatory grin spreading across his flushed face. "Well, well, well," Julian slurred, gesturing broadly with his free hand. "If it isn't the ghost of the 42nd floor, still pushing the cart, Mark? Still scrubbing the dirt?" I clicked the power switch on the vacuum. The motor died, leaving a heavy silence in the hallway. I leaned on the handle, looking at him. "Just finishing up, Mr. Croft." "Look at you," Julian laughed, a harsh, echoing sound. He walked closer, looking around the immaculate frosted glass walls of his domain. "Take a good look around, old man. Smell the air. This is what winning smells like. We just threw the party of the decade. The mayor was there, the alderman, the press." He stepped up right into my personal space. The alcohol on his breath was overpowering. "Tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. sharp, I'm walking up to the 60th floor, Julian boasted, his eyes wide with a manic, unearned triumph. "I am sitting down with the supreme chairman of Cornerstone Group. He's going to sign a piece of paper, and I am going to become a titan in this city. Untouchable." "Is that right?" I asked, my voice flat, betraying absolutely nothing. "That's right," Julian sneered. He looked down at my scuffed work boots, shaking his head in mock pity. "You spend your whole life working with your hands, breaking your back, and what do you have to show for it? A gray shirt and a bucket of dirty water. You're a cautionary tale, Mark." Julian reached into the pocket of his tuxedo trousers. He pulled out a crumpled, damp $20 bill. He didn't hand it to me. He held it out and intentionally let it drop. It fluttered down, landing on the carpet inches from the steel toe of my right boot. "Here," Julian said, turning away toward his office. "Buy yourself a better pair of shoes. You're depressing to look at. Make sure my trash is empty before you leave." Julian disappeared into his office, the heavy glass door swinging shut behind him. I stood in the hallway for a long moment, staring at the crumpled green bill on the floor. It was the perfect poetic summation of everything he was. It was a gesture of supreme arrogance, funded entirely by stolen money, directed at the very man who actually owned the floor he was standing on. I reached down and picked up the $20 bill. I didn't put it in my pocket. I walked quietly into his office. Julian was in his private restroom, the sound of running water echoing through the suite. I walked over to his massive, imported mahogany desk. I smoothed the $20 bill out flat and placed it precisely in the center of his leather desk blotter. Then, I looked down at my feet. I reached down and unlaced my left steel-toe boot. I stepped out of it. I unlaced the right one, stepping onto the plush carpet in my thick wool socks. I picked up the heavy boots, walked out of the office, and placed them neatly, side by side, next to my yellow mop bucket in the hallway. I didn't need them anymore. I took off the faded gray workshirt, folding it over the handle of the cart, revealing the plain black undershirt beneath. Without a word, I walked to the service elevator, pressed the button, and rode it down to the basement in my socks. The disguise was over. The observation period was complete. Julian Croft had exactly 8 hours left to enjoy his false victory. Tomorrow, he would finally meet the chairman. The 60th floor of Cornerstone Tower was designed to intimidate. It did not rely on the loud, flashy glass and neon aesthetic that Julian Croft favored. Instead, it was built on weight. The floors were solid, reclaimed American oak. The walls were paneled in dark walnut. The acoustic design of the executive boardroom absorbed sound, creating a heavy, absolute silence that forced visitors to lower their voices instinctively. At 9:55 a.m. on Saturday, I stood in my private adjoining office, adjusting the cuffs of my charcoal Savile Row suit. Through the two-way mirror, I could see the boardroom. Julian Croft sat at the center of the massive conference table. He looked pale, likely nursing a severe hangover from his $150,000 gala the night before, but he was buzzing with a nervous, electric arrogance. He wore a crisp Tom Ford suit and his custom Italian leather shoes. Next to him sat my daughter Chloe. She wore a tailored white designer dress, her posture perfect, her face set in a practiced mask of high society serenity. She was playing the role of the visionary CEO's wife to perfection. She looked at the expensive art on the walls, completely unaware that she had walked past those same paintings in her childhood home before I moved them to the corporate office. At exactly 10:00 a.m., Elias Thorne entered the boardroom, flanked by two of our senior corporate attorneys. Julian immediately stood up, buttoning his jacket, pasting on a winning, deferential smile. Chloe remained seated, crossing her legs gracefully. "Mr. Thorne," Julian said, extending his hand, "an absolute pleasure. The gala ran a bit late last night, but we wouldn't miss this for the world. Elias did not take Julian's hand. He simply opened a leather portfolio and slid a thick stack of legal documents across the polished oak table. "Mr. Croft," Elias said, his voice entirely devoid of warmth, "this is the final Series B investment contract for $5 million. As we discussed, Clause 14, Section C requires your signature certifying that all financial disclosures provided to Cornerstone Group over the last 90 days are entirely accurate and that no operating capital has been diverted." Julian chuckled, pulling a silver Mont Blanc pen from his breast pocket. "Standard boilerplate. I assure you, Mr. Thorne, Apex Solutions runs a completely transparent ledger." "Then sign," Elias instructed. I watched through the glass. Julian did not hesitate. He didn't even read the clause. Driven by desperation and the blinding belief in his own superiority, Julian uncapped his pen, flipped to the final page, and signed his name with a flourish. He pushed the binder back toward Elias. "There, done. Now, I believe I was promised an introduction to the Supreme Chairman?" Elias closed the binder. He picked it up, handed it to one of the attorneys, and looked toward the heavy double doors connecting to my private office. "The chairman is ready," Elias said. I opened the doors and stepped into the boardroom. The silence that followed was not just quiet, it was a physical vacuum. It sucked the air out of the room. Julian's practiced smile froze. His eyes locked onto my face, then dropped down to the bespoke charcoal suit, and finally down to my polished black Oxfords. His brain clearly could not process the visual data. He was looking at Mark the janitor, the old man he had berated in the hallway 8 hours ago, walking into a billionaire's sanctuary. Chloe's reaction was entirely different. She didn't look at my clothes. She looked into my eyes, and a profound, paralyzing terror seized her features. She knew exactly who I was, but she had never seen me in this room. I walked slowly to the head of the table. I did not sit. I placed my hands flat on the oak surface and looked directly at Julian. "You left your tip on the desk, Julian," I said. My voice was calm, conversational, and entirely merciless. "Though I suppose $20 is a bit light for scrubbing vomit off your baseboards." Julian's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked at Elias, then back to me, his chest rising and falling rapidly. "What? What is this, Mark? What are you doing up here?" "My name is Marcus Vance," I said. "I am the founder and sole owner of Cornerstone Group. I own this firm. I own this building. And as of 60 seconds ago, I own you." Julian staggered backward, his calves hitting the edge of his chair. No, that's impossible. You're a maintenance worker. You push a cart." He turned frantically toward Chloe. "Chloe, who is this guy? Did you know about this?" Chloe couldn't speak. She was trembling, her knuckles white as she gripped the armrests of her chair. I signaled to Elias. Elias reached into his briefcase and pulled out the large, taped-together sheets of shredded paper. He laid them flat on the table, right next to the freshly signed Series B contract. Julian looked down at the reconstructed pages. I watched the exact moment his fabricated reality collapsed. His eyes widened, tracking the numbers, recognizing his own hidden ledger. "Over the last 8 months, you embezzled $1.4 million of investor capital through a shell company called Aura Consulting LLC, I stated, my voice echoing slightly in the quiet room. "You used my building to run your fraud, and you intended to use my $5 million to quietly replace the stolen funds before the board caught you." "Marcus, please, listen to me," Julian stammered, his arrogance instantly replaced by raw, primal panic. He held up his hands, taking a step toward me. "It was a bridge loan. I was going to pay it all back today. I just needed the Series B to clear, and then we were going public. We're family." "We are not family," I corrected quietly. "And you are not going public." I picked up the signed Series B contract. I held it up so he could see his fresh ink. "Until you signed this document, you were merely a thief stealing from your own sinking ship," I explained, tearing the contract perfectly in half. "But by signing Clause 14, Section C with a falsified ledger, you just committed felony wire fraud and federal securities fraud against Cornerstone Group." Julian dropped into his chair, burying his face in his hands. "The $5 million is gone," I continued, tearing the document again and letting the pieces fall onto the table. "Furthermore, the morality clause in your lease has been triggered. Your company is technically insolvent. Building security is currently on the 42nd floor, boxing up your servers and changing the locks. You have 30 days to file for bankruptcy, Julian, but you are evicted today. First thing Monday morning, my attorneys are handing this reconstructed ledger and your signed, fraudulent contract to the federal prosecutor's office." "Dad!" Chloe practically lunged across the table. Tears were streaming down her face, her carefully manicured image entirely destroyed. "Dad, please," she begged, her voice shrill and desperate. "You can't do this. We'll lose everything. The house, the cars. Julian will go to prison. I didn't know about the money. I swear to God I didn't know." I looked at my daughter. The pain of her betrayal had burned itself out days ago, leaving only a cold, protective boundary. "I believe you," I said evenly. "I don't think you knew about the embezzlement, but I know what you did know." Chloe froze, her breath catching in her throat. "You knew who I was when you walked into that executive lounge," I told her, the memory of the spilled scotch flashing in my mind. "You saw the man who paid for your private schools, who bought the coat on your back, on his hands and knees scrubbing your husband's shoes. You saw him being humiliated, and you looked away." "I panicked!" Chloe cried out, reaching for my arm. I stepped back out of her reach. "I was scared. He's my husband." "No, Chloe," I said softly. "You were embarrassed. You chose a monster's lifestyle over your father's dignity." I pulled my phone from my pocket, opening the text message she had sent me, and placed it on the table facing her. "Your working-class aura doesn't fit our brand. That was your choice." "Dad, I'm sorry. I'll leave him. I'll come home." "You will leave him because the money is gone," I corrected. "Not because you possess a moral compass. My attorneys have already restructured my estate. Your trust fund has been dissolved. My assets will go to a foundation upon my death. You are entirely cut off, Chloe. I am simply respecting your boundary. I am no longer part of your brand." Chloe collapsed into her chair, sobbing hysterically, realizing that her ultimate safety net had just been permanently removed. Julian was staring blankly at the wall, a ruined man. I nodded to Elias. "Have security escort them to the lobby. They are no longer permitted on the premises." As the corporate attorneys stepped forward to guide my weeping daughter and my broken son-in-law out of the boardroom, the side door opened again. Hector stepped in. He was wearing his standard gray maintenance uniform. He looked incredibly out of place amid the walnut and oak, holding his hat in his hands, glancing nervously at Elias and then at me. "Mark?" Hector asked softly, utterly bewildered. "They said you needed to see me up here?" I walked around the table, offering a genuine warm smile. I extended my hand. Hector looked at it, then at the bespoke suit before tentatively shaking it. "Hector," I said, "I have a confession to make. My name isn't Mark. I own this company." Hector's jaw dropped slightly. He looked around the massive boardroom, then back to me, shaking his head. "Madre de Dios. The old man with the mop. You own the tower?" "I do," I confirmed, "and I have a severe staffing problem. The current head of building management is retiring next month. I need a man who understands the foundation of this building, a man who shares his lunch with strangers and who steps in to clean up a mess so an old man doesn't have to." Hector blinked, completely stunned. "The position comes with an $80,000 raise, full corporate benefits, and an office on the 4th floor, I told him. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a certified cashier's check, handing it to him. "And this is a signing bonus. $8,000, exactly enough to cover Elena's nursing tuition for the semester. She's not dropping out, Hector, and you aren't working weekends at the rail yard." Hector stared at the check. His hands began to shake. A single tear escaped, tracking down the deep lines of his weathered face. He looked up at me, gripping the piece of paper like a lifeline. "Mark, Mr. Vance, I don't know what to say." "You already said it last night, Hector," I replied, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Things have a way of working out for good men." Hector pulled me into a fierce, sudden embrace, the heavy fabric of his work uniform pressing against my suit. It was the first honest moment of human connection in this building in weeks. 15 minutes later, the boardroom was empty. I walked back into my private office and stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the sprawling grid of Chicago. Down on the street level, I watched two tiny figures, Julian and Chloe, standing on the wet pavement waiting for a cab they could no longer afford. I had lost my daughter. That was a tragedy that would likely sit heavy in my chest for the rest of my life. But as I looked down at the concrete and steel of the city I had spent my life building, I felt a quiet, enduring peace. I had diagnosed the rot. I had brought down the corrupt structure before it could do any more damage. I walked over to my bookshelf. There, sitting proudly next to a row of leather-bound financial texts, was a pair of scuffed, oil-stained steel-toe work boots. I left them exactly where they belonged, a reminder of the calluses it takes to build a life and the heavy boots required to protect it.